International News Edition. His Majesty the King holds a series of meetings with world leaders taking part in the annual World Economic Forum in the Swiss resort of Davos. The Prime Minister and a UN official discussed joint programs to address the impact of the Syrian refugee crisis on Jordan. And Yemen's parliament rejects the resignation offered by the country's president amid the standoff with the Houthi movement. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King held a series of bilateral meetings after he arrived in Davos, Switzerland, to take part in the 45th World Economic Forum, WEF. King Abdullah met King Felipe of Belgium and discussed with him relations between the two kingdoms, ways to further boost cooperation, as well as the situation in the region. His Majesty also met Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and reviewed with him ways to forge closer relations in economic and other fields between Jordan and Egypt, in addition to the latest regional and international developments. King Abdullah spoke about Jordan's stance towards regional and international challenges, particularly efforts to fight terrorism and extremism. The two leaders said they backed efforts to face the threats of terrorist organizations within an active strategy to preserve global peace and security, and called for intensive efforts to revive Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. His Majesty also met with Panama's President Juan Carlos Varela Rodriguez and discussed bilateral relations. He also met Turkish Prime Minister Ahmed Davutoglu for a discussion of relations and the situation in the region. They also reviewed ways to boost economic investment and trade ties between Jordan and Turkey through launching joint ventures. King Abdullah also met with board representatives and CEOs of major world economic and investment companies, as well as firms specialized in the IT field. In the presence of Her Majesty Queen Rania, the King came together with the chairman of the I'mar and the CEOs of Sesco, Google, Nissan and Renault companies and discussed cooperation between Jordan and their companies. The King urged representatives of the companies to increase their investment in Jordan and benefit from opportunities provided by its economy. The World Economic Forum announced that its forum on the Middle East and North Africa will be held at the Dead Sea in Jordan on May the 21st to the 23rd. A WEF press release said the forum at the Dead Sea, convening under the theme Shaping a New Strategic Context, will attract more than 800 government, business and civil society leaders from more than 50 countries. Convening at a pivotal time, the meeting will particularly focus on new developments and institution-building efforts in countries of the Levant and North Africa. The two regions are creating an important momentum for regional and cross-regional trade and investment, including with countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, as well as with the United States, Europe and Asia. These developments will be addressed in the context of significant geopolitical realignments in response to the security and humanitarian imperatives around Iraq, Syria and Libya. This year will mark the 8th WEF or WEF meeting in Jordan as host. The WEF's annual assessment of global hazards sets the scene for the Davos meeting, although it's based on responses received some months ago. It is the first time the survey has headlined conflict as the top risk, reflecting an increasingly dangerous world. In all, the 80-page report analyzed 28 global risks for the next 10 years. The managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, tackled the economic problems facing the world today, but she described the situation as good. UN Special Envoy for Global Education, former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown, spoke about the plight of Syrian refugee children at a UNESCO press conference.
Now, I'm convinced now that we need an emergency fund for education where there are humanitarian crises. That countries should put upfront money to make it possible for UNICEF and other organizations to provide help for children when they're in urgent need. We shouldn't have to wait a year, or in this case more than a year, for some help to come when we have a plan and we know we can do something urgently. And the importance of education in a crisis is that while, yes, every child needs shelter and needs food and nutrition and needs health care, a child also needs hope.
Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour led a meeting of the Ministerial Economic Development Committee. The panel was briefed by Jordan Petroleum Refinery CEO Abdul Karim Alaween on an expansion scheme of the Kingdom's Sol oil refinery. Alaween said Jordan was in a dire need of the project amid rising demand and consumption of oil derivatives that should meet international standards. He said the project will help turn fuel surplus into high-value derivatives such as diesel, aviation fuel and gasoline. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour and UN Resident Humanitarian Coordinator in Jordan, Edward Callan, discussed joint programs being implemented by Jordan and international organizations involved in dealing with the fallout of the Syria crisis on Jordan. Mansour briefed the UN official on the challenges and burdens posed by the refugee influx on the kingdom and other host nations. The Prime Minister said Jordan will keep its borders open to the Syrian refugees, but he stressed the ongoing influx requires more international support to help the kingdom host such a large number of displaced people. Mansour said international aid accounts for only 19% of the total cost of hosting refugees, while the kingdom bears the rest. Callan said the world body realized the huge burdens Jordan had to bear and will rally international support for the kingdom to continue its humanitarian role towards the refugees. In other news now, Yemen's parliament rejected the resignation offered by President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi. A government source said earlier that the president had tendered his resignation not long after Prime Minister Khalal offered his own to Hadi, who has spent months locked in a standoff with the powerful Houthi movement. Bahah said in the resignation letter that the government did not want to be dragged into what he called an unconstructive political maze that is not based on law and order. Early in the day, Houthi rebels welcomed proposed concessions by the government on power sharing. But Houthi gunmen still held positions outside the residence of Hadi, who remains a virtual prisoner there. Here's more on the situation.
Calm has returned to the streets of Sana'a just days after violence erupted in the Yemeni capital. Despite patrols of Houthi rebels through much of the city, a tentative deal to defuse the country's political crisis has been reached. Residents remain hopeful.
I hope the situation will get better and Yemen becomes more secure now that an agreement has been reached.
The government confirmed a power-sharing agreement with the Houthis, who remain on guard at the presidential palace. The Houthis will have to remove their men from the palace and release the president's chief of staff. Some residents worry that the parties involved could put their personal gain first.
I hope this agreement will be for the good of Yemen. The signatory parties to the agreement are the ones who will decide whether to work for the good of Yemen or for their own interests and other foreign agendas.
Since the agreement, the country is moving to reopen state institutions, schools, universities, and sea and airports after they closed during this week's violence.
Members of the US-led coalition against IS held a meeting in London to discuss ways of fighting the militant group. The meeting, attended by US Secretary of State John Kerry and Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, dealt with ways to intensify the campaign against IS in Syria, Iraq, and Al-Shwab. Here's more.
Representatives from 21 of the anti-IS coalition members gather in London to stand against the militant group. Among them were French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius and Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi. British Prime Minister David Cameron told al-Abadi before the meeting that he supports the new Iraqi government.
I want to say very clearly to you how strongly we support the new Iraqi government.
The head of the Iraqi government said his country's forces have reversed many IS advances, but Iraq is facing a real crisis. During the coalition meeting, leaders discussed how they can do more militarily, more to cut the extremist group's finances, and more to stem the flow of fighters. US Secretary of State John Kerry spoke of the progress that had been made in the campaign against IS militants, since it began in September.
We still have a lot of work to do. And the purpose of coming here is to bring everybody's best advice, everybody's thoughts about where there may be weaknesses, everybody's thoughts about things we can do better, put that together, improve our own performance and operation, and lay down the strategy for the days ahead.
British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond stressed the importance of all aspects of the campaign against IS militants. He said he hopes the meeting of key coalition members would be the first of many consultations.
What we are doing with this meeting is bringing together the key members of that coalition, those that are most actively engaged in the front line, to take stock of our achievements over the last 4 or 5 months, to hear from General John Allen about what is happening on the ground, and to plan the next steps of this campaign, which we've all recognised will be a long haul to restoring full Iraqi government control of all the territory of Iraq.
The London meeting is taking place a day after Kurdish forces in northern Iraq said they had cleared IS fighters from nearly 500 square kilometers of territory. The Kurds have also said they broke a key IS supply line between the city of Mosul and strongholds to the west near Syria. Hibel Atoun for the News at 10.
European stocks hit highs after the European Central Bank unveiled a bond-buying scheme in a bid to revive the region's economy and stave off deflation. ECB President Mario Draghi said the central bank would embark on a quantitative easing program which, together with existing schemes, will pump 60 billion euros a month into the Eurozone economy from this March until September next year. The German DAX was up by 0.3% after hitting a record high, while Italy's MIB index was up by 1.2% and Spain's IBEX was up 1.1%. The news sent the euro currency to an 11-year low against the dollar at $1.14. The recent drop in the euro is seen as a major positive catalyst for European corporate earnings this year, particularly for exporters in sectors such as aerospace. Over to Ukraine. At least 41 Ukrainian soldiers and civilians were killed in one of the heaviest 24-hour spells of fighting in the 9-month separatist war. Kiev and pro-Russian rebel officials said the toll included 13 people killed in a trolleybus shelling in the rebel bastion city of Donetsk. 10 soldiers have died across the war zone since yesterday. Rebel commander said another 10 civilians were killed in the Donetsk region town of Gorlivka. The separatist-controlled police department of the neighboring Lugansk province said at least 8 people had also been killed in their area. Meanwhile, NATO's military leaders intend to re-establish contact with their Russian counterparts after months of tension over the crisis in Ukraine. High-level military contact between Russia and NATO used to take place regularly until Russia's intervention in Ukraine.
We are going to reestablish that. We have talked among several of us senior military leaders how we'll do that. I will allow them to roll out their plans as opposed to speak for them. But yes, we are going to reestablish communication with Valerie.
Nine times world rally champion Sébastien Loeb was straight back in the groove when he was fastest in the shakedown stage for the Monte Carlo rally. The Frenchman has been away from rallies for 15 months, but he was quickly at ease in the Citroën, 0.4 seconds faster than Chris Meeke of Northern Ireland in a similar car. Third fastest was 2014 world champion Sébastien Ogier of France in the first of the Volkswagen Polos. To tennis, Victoria Azarenka was back in top form at the Australian Open in Melbourne after an injury-blighted season, upsetting 8th seed Karolina Wozniacki 6-4, 6-4 to reach the third round of the tournament. The Belarusian was too powerful for the Dane, bullying her from the baseline to wrap up the match in 98 minutes. at Margaret Court Arena. She advances to play Czech 26th seed Barbara Zalvova-Strycova in the next round. Wimbledon champion Petra Kvitova also made it to the third round of the tournament by beating German Mona Bartel 6-2, 6-4. The Czech #1 will now play Madison Keys of the United States. Now let's have a look at the weather forecast. Cold tonight in most regions with northeasterly to easterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, fair weather is forecast for much of the hilly areas and warm in the Jordan Valley with a high of 24 degrees at the Dead Sea. Winds tomorrow will change to southeasterly fresh, picking up at times. The Port of Aqaba should enjoy warm weather as well with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. There's a chance for frost formation tonight, especially across the southern highlands and the eastern plains. Next, at the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close our top stories once again. His Majesty the King holds a series of meetings with world leaders taking part in the annual World Economic Forum in the Swiss resort of Davos. The Prime Minister and a UN official discussed joint programs to address the impact of the Syrian refugee crisis on Jordan. And Yemen's parliament rejects the resignation offered by the country's president amid the standoff with the Houthi movement. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Raad Lubtoush. Thank you so much for your company.